October 29, 2013. Imagine a teenager walking into GameStop after school with the biggest smile on his face. He heads straight to the counter, hands over his pre order receipt, and waits. The employee reaches behind the register and places the game on her counter, and that game was Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Homework just didn't stand a chance at that afternoon. I rush home, turn on my PS3, and for the next several weeks, I just disappear into the Caribbean, sailing across crystal blue waters, boarding enemy ships, searching for treasure, and just living the fantasy of being a pirate. And at the center of it all, it was him, Edward Kenway. Back then, I admired him because he was fearless. He was charismatic, confident, and lived without rules. More than 10 years later, I came back to Black Flag, thanks to Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. Only this time, I wasn't looking at Edward through the eyes of a teenager. I was looking at him as an adult. Edward's story isn't about becoming a legendary pirate. It's about a man who spent years chasing freedom, only to discover that he was actually searching for purpose. Edward Kenway was born in Wales in 1693. He wasn't born into wealth or power. Like many people, he dreamed of giving himself and the woman he loved, Caroline Scott, a better life. They eventually married, but Edward quickly became frustrated with the simple life they were living. He believed he was meant for something greater. Instead of staying home, he sailed to the West Indies, hoping to make his fortune as a privateer. But when the war ended, that opportunity disappeared. Rather than returning home, Edward turned to piracy. That decision changed everything. Along the way, he crossed paths with legendary pirates like Blackbeard, Charles Vane, Anne Bonny, Calico Jack Rackham, and Benjamin Hornigold. He also found himself caught between the century-old conflict of the Assassins Templars. The interesting thing is that Edward didn't initially care about either side. He wasn't fighting for justice. He wasn't fighting for order. He was fighting for himself. Money, fame, freedom. He believed those things would finally make him happy. But life had other plans. As the year passed, Edward watched friends die one after the other. Dreams fell apart, the pirate republic of Nassau crumbled, the excitement he was chasing slowly turned into loneliness. By the end of his journey, he realized that the treasure he spent years searching for was never gold. It was purpose. He eventually joined the Assassin's Brotherhood, returned to England, reunited with his daughter Jennifer, and raised his son Haytham, who would later become one of the most important figures in the Assassin's Creed universe. Edward's greatest victory wasn't becoming a legendary pirate. It was becoming someone his family could be proud of. Psychologically, Edward's fascinating because he is incredibly human. He's driven by ambition and he wants respect. He wants to prove that he's capable of becoming someone important. Deep down, he believed that if he earns enough money and enough recognition, he'll finally feel complete. I think many of us can relate to that. Maybe we don't dream about becoming pirates, but we chase promotions, expensive cars, bigger houses, or social status, believing that once we reach those goals, everything will fall into place. Edward represents the part of us that thinks success will automatically create happiness. Instead, every victory leaves him wanting more. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the hedonic treadmill. We achieve one goal, feel satisfied for a short time, and then immediately begin chasing the next one. Without realizing, we spend our lives running without asking ourselves why. Edward spent years on the treadmill. Only after experience loss does he finally stop long enough to ask questions that really matter. What kind of man do I want to become? That question changed his entire life. Edward's philosophy changes more than almost any protagonist in the series. Early on, he believes freedom means having no rules, no responsibility, no authority telling you what to do. To him, freedom is living entirely for yourself. It's an exciting idea, and honestly, it's one that sounds appealing when you're young. Who wouldn't want complete freedom? But Black Flag slowly shows us the weakness of that philosophy. Freedom without responsibility becomes selfishness. Freedom without purpose becomes emptiness. Edward gained almost everything he wanted, yet he loses many people who matter most. That's when his understanding of freedom begins to mature. The assassins don't teach him giving up his freedom. They teach him to use it wisely. Real freedom isn't doing whatever you want and whenever you want to. Real freedom is having the discipline to choose what is right, even when something easier is available. By the end of the story, Edward hasn't become weaker, he becomes wiser. He still values freedom. He simply understands that freedom means very little if it isn't used to protect something greater than yourself. When we first meet Edward, he wants one thing: freedom. Not the kind of freedom that the assassin fights for. He wants money, fame, adventure, a life where no one tells him what to do. At first, he looks like he's winning. He has a powerful ship. He becomes one of the most feared pirates in the Caribbean. Everyone knows his name. But underneath all that success, he's losing almost everyone he truly mattered. His closest friends die. The pirate dream begins to collapse. The freedom he fought so hard for slowly becomes loneliness. And I think that's something that many of us experience in real life. We tell ourselves, once I make enough money, once I buy that car, once I finally become successful, then I'll be happy. But purpose and success aren't always the same thing. Edward eventually realizes that freedom without something or someone to live for becomes empty. Because freedom isn't simply doing whatever you want, it's having something meaningful worth protecting. One of Edward's greatest strengths is confidence, but it's also his biggest weakness. He constantly believes he's the smartest man in every room. He ignores advice, he takes unnecessary risks, he thinks he can solve every problem on his own. His pride blinds him, and the cost is enormous. Some people closest to him pay the price for a decision they never made. That's one of the hardest truths about pride. Sometimes we're not the only ones who suffer because of it. As I gotten older, I realized maturity isn't about always having the right answer. It's knowing when you don't. It's listening. It's admitting you're wrong. It's being willing to change before life forces you to. Edward eventually learned this. Unfortunately, only after losing almost everything. This is the lesson that makes Edward one of my favorite protagonists. He changes, not because someone forces him, not because it was easy, but because he finally understood the kind of man he wanted to be. He wanted to become. By the end of Black Flag, Edward isn't the same pirate we met at the beginning. He's calmer, more thoughtful, more selfless. He understands responsibility. He understands sacrifice. Most importantly, he understands that our past doesn't have to define our future. I think that's a message everyone needs to hear. We all make mistakes. We waste time. We chase the wrong things. We hurt people. But none of those things means we're stuck being the person forever. Growth is always possible, as long as we're willing to choose it. That's why Edward Kenway continues to resonate with so many people more than a decade after Black Flag was released. He's not perfect, he's impulsive, he's selfish, he's stubborn. He makes mistakes that hurt both himself and the people around him. But he changes, and that's something we can all admire. Some heroes begin their story as good people. Edward doesn't. He earns that title. His story reminds us that our past doesn't define our future, that success without purpose is ultimately empty, and that becoming a better person is a journey rather than a single decision. When I first played Black Flag, I wanted to be Edward because he looked free. Today, I admire him for completely different reasons. I admire him because he had the courage to become the man he was always capable of being. And maybe that's the greatest treasure he ever found.